Hi, are you ready to solve number or integer problems? If yes, then let's do this. To solve any type of word problem, we just need to follow those simple steps that we usually do during our elementary years. We learned to solve the problems by first considering the situation, what are the given, and what is asked. Then definitely later on we proceed with their relationships. And then we look at how do we make a statement in the form of an equation. We solve it, and definitely the last step is to check whether our answers are correct or not. So those steps in mind, let us try to solve these three items here that are pertaining to number or integer problems. Now, these are very common when you talk about applications of linear equation in one variable, since we are just going to look at the relationships between numbers, specifically integers. When you talk about integers, there are unique descriptions or characteristics to descriptions of numbers. Let's say when two numbers are consecutive, they have a different relationship. If two numbers are even, if two numbers are odd, or if they are multiples of other numbers, factors of other numbers, etc., etc. So in number one, we are going to solve this problem here, that specific situation. One number is 10, more than thrice the other number. If their sum is 110, then what are the numbers? For us to solve this, let's start first with considering what are the details given. In our module, we had the abbreviation for the word action. Again, it's just a play of words I have placed in our module. Action. When you talk about A, it could stand with the abridging, meaning we're going to summarize the facts that would actually tell us to focus on what are the details given. C stand for concede. That would mean we are going to give representations to those numbers, specifically in this situation, given in our situation. T is now we're going to translate using those representations given so that we could come up with a number sentence or an equation. I is implementation, meaning we're going to solve it. O is may or may not be there, but I just specifically place O there so that we could overplay, meaning we're going to, as soon as we have solved something else, if the question, just like in number one here, we are asked about the two numbers. So we are going to solve the other so that we are going to achieve what is asked. And definitely for N, neutralize, that could actually stands for looking back or checking so that we would know that we could actually address all the details given in letter A. So letter A meaning abridging, as I've mentioned earlier, we are going to look at the details. So first, there are two numbers. Pardon me if I'm going to write. So I have here two numbers. So we are given with two numbers, and then one number is 10 more than twice the other number. So that's the relationship. Okay, so we're going to look at it later on as we translate or in the next step, letter C. Another detail is their sum is 110. Right? So we are cleared here that we are going to look at their sum later on as we are done with their representations. So next step is letter C. Letter C means conceding, or in other sense, we're going to give representations in symbolic form to those two numbers given. So we are given here that one number is 10 more than twice the other number. It's very clear that one of the two numbers is smaller than the other. Yeah, again, one of the two is smaller than the other. When you talk about the smaller number, that is actually where we're going to give the simplest form of representation. Why? Because if you have a smaller number and then later on a larger number dependent on that smaller number, we're just going to give the correct representations to the larger number once we apply the simplest representation for, again, the smaller number. And the simpler representation is when we give it as let x be the smaller. Okay, so let's also, I'm going to change this, the font size for this, so that it would be clear. Okay, so we have here let x be the smaller. Now that we are done with which is smaller than the other, let's look at the situation. One number is 10 more than thrice the other number. So this is a smaller number. Looking for the bigger number is this relationship here, that that bigger number is 10 more than thrice the smaller or the other number. It could be given the situation by comprehending it. This is the smaller number and this is the larger number. So looking at this situation, the larger number, let me write here, the larger number is 10 more than thrice the other number. So looking back in our translating algebraic expressions, how do we look at their relationships? Very easy to understood that it's 10 more than thrice the smaller or the other number. It would mean that if we're going to have here, we're going to thrice the smaller number and add 10, this is our larger number. Again, so this would mean the one number is 10 more than thrice the other number. So we have this C for representation. Mind you, if your representation here is incorrect, all the other steps will be incorrect. So with this, let's proceed to the next step, T on translation. The first statement in our given problem was used to determine the relationship between the smaller and the larger number with this area here in our step 2. So what statement now are we going to use to translate? Here is the situation here given that their sum is 110. In other sense, if you're going to add the smaller and the larger number, it's 110. But we don't know what is the smaller nor the larger number. As a matter of fact, they are what is asked. That's what we are going to solve later. Again, we don't know them. However, in step 2, we have already represented them with these symbols. And instead of giving an exact value, let's use this to get 110. And if we talk about sum in translation, we're just going to add them up. So in short, we will have here supposedly smaller plus larger is equal to 110. This is what does the sum of 110 tells us. And instead of exact numbers I have mentioned earlier, we're going to use the representation. Smaller number is x, and the larger number is 3x plus 10. Their sum must be 110. This is now the correct translation for this given situation. Again, the sum of the two numbers, we coined smaller and larger with these notations. So just simply use them and equate them to 110, and this is now your equation. Step I in this manner is to implement. In short, we are going to solve this linear equation in one variable to come up with the value of the variable here that could help us understand what are solved, rather the smaller and the larger number. So from here onwards, what you need are those concepts you've learned in solving linear equations. We could start with adding these two adding these two terms here, for they are like, since they do have the same variable x. So you will have here 4x plus 10 is equal to 110. Going forward, you will have here, will have to subtract 10 both sides, and you will get here 4x is equal to 100. And finally, sorry, that's 100. It looks like 6, but it's 0. And finally, divide both sides by 4 to cancel this out. The result, for x is 25. Sorry, 25. So this is the value of the variable in our given equation. And what does this represents? Going back to the second step, we have coined there earlier that x here is the representation for the smaller number. So we do expect that the value for x, which is 25, this is your smaller number. Now, where do we go after this? We have O and N. O is only possible if there are more than one, which is asked. Okay, if the question is only asking about the smaller number, then you don't need to use O. But since we are asking about the two numbers, so let's proceed with O. O in our acronym stands for overplay. And when we talk about overplay, it's just simply saying or telling us to solve the other. So since it is the smaller and we are asked about both numbers, we are going to use this value to get the larger number. And since we have represented the larger number as a 3x plus 10, let's use that value to get the larger number. In short, you'll have here 3 times, sorry, times 25 plus 10. You are going now to evaluate this. 3 times 25, you will have 75. Sorry, 75. And you will have here plus 10. So the answer here is 85. So this is the result for 3x plus 10, which is the representation for the larger number. To end this process here, we all need to consider n, neutralizing the situation, meaning meeting both ends, or the other's unique term for checking. So by looking back, let's look at the situation. We already used the situation here. We are going to use this concept here that their sum should be 110. Let's see if the sum, so let me copy this here. This is the situation earlier. The smaller and the larger should be 110. And once we substitute them, the smaller is 25, the larger is 85. Is it equal to 110? As I have reminded you before, when we are doing checking, always use question mark, even if it's too obvious, for our goal is to make sure that both sides of the equation will yield the same result. And definitely, 25 plus 85, you will have 110, and you will have here another 110, check mark. This now signifies that our results for the two numbers, which are smaller to be 25 and the larger to be 85, are the answers to the problem. And if you would just like to make it clearer, you could actually have here the final statement that the two numbers are 25 and 85. This is now the result for number 1.